The highway stretched out like a gray ribbon, pulled tight across the Oregon wilderness, empty in both directions as far as the eye could see. Late afternoon light came down through the pines at a low angle, painting the asphalt in long stripes of amber and shadow. The air smelled of dry pine needles and distance. Dara Cole rode alone. She always rode alone. The Harley Sportster beneath her was old black and deliberately unremarkable. No chrome polish, no decorative stitching, no vanity plates. The leather saddlebags were worn smooth at the corners. The engine ran clean and quiet for a machine its age, a steady mechanical heartbeat that had carried her through 20 years of roads she never planned to take twice. She wore a dark jacket broken in over decades with patches she no longer turned toward the light. Her hair, silver-streaked and pulled back under her helmet, had gone that color early. By 35, it was already more salt than pepper. By 40, she had stopped caring. 45 years old, and Dara Cole had the eyes of someone much older. Not tired eyes, not sad eyes. The kind of eyes that have seen too much of the wrong things and learned to scan every room, every road, every tree line for the thing that doesn't belong. Occupational habit from a life she'd half left behind. The highway unrolled ahead of her, and she followed it the way she always did, not toward anything but away. Away from the last town, away from the last face that had looked at her a moment too long, away from the version of herself that still showed up in the mirror some mornings and asked uncomfortable questions. She had no destination today. That was the honest answer. She had a direction west roughly, and enough cash in the left saddlebag to keep the tank filled and her stomach from complaining for another week. Beyond that, no plan, no schedule, no one expecting her anywhere. This was the life she had chosen. Or rather, the life she had constructed around herself like a wall, brick by careful brick, until the inside was quiet enough to tolerate. The road curved gently to the right, following the contour of the land as the forest thickened on both sides. Highway 38, deep in Douglas County, was not a road that saw much traffic on a Tuesday in late July. She had passed 3 vehicles in the last 40 minutes. A logging truck heading east, a battered pickup with a broken taillight, and a family sedan moving 10 miles under the limit, with a canoe strapped to the roof. None of them had looked at her twice. Good. She eased off the throttle as the curve tightened, leaning the bike into it with the automatic ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. On the far side of the curve, the road straightened again, and the forest opened up slightly on the right, where a seasonal creek had cut a shallow ravine into the hillside. The trees in that section were older, their canopy higher. The underbrush below them dried to a pale straw color by weeks of summer heat without rain. Dara noticed the smell first. Not wood smoke, not the pleasant, lazy kind that drifted from a campfire on a cool evening. This was different, harsher, heavier, the kind of smell that sat at the back of the throat and made the chest tighten. She had grown up in the Pacific Northwest. She knew what a forest fire smelled like before you could see it. She straightened up in the saddle, scanning right. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards off the road, a faint orange glow flickered between the trunks, low to the ground, spreading. Not a campfire. Too white, too restless, moving with a wind that hadn't reached the road yet. She watched it for 3 seconds, calculating. Dry summer, Douglas fir, resin-soaked underbrush. A fire that size in that kind of fuel would double every few minutes. She had already started to turn her eyes back to the road when she heard it. She wasn't sure at first. The engine noise filled her ears even through the helmet, and the wind of her passage created a constant low roar that swallowed small sounds the way the ocean swallows stones. But she slowed instinctively, some part of her brain processing what the conscious mind hadn't yet identified. She pulled off the throttle and coasted, lifting her face. There, faint, human, a child's voice. Dara pulled the bike onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine. The sudden silence was startling, the way silence always is when it replaces mechanical noise. Birds, wind in the upper canopy, the distant dry crackling of the fire. And underneath all of it, thin and nearly lost a sound that raised the hair on the back of her neck. A child crying for help. She had her helmet off before she fully registered the decision. She set it on the seat, swung her leg over, and stood for a moment at the tree line, head tilted, listening. The voice came again, weak, desperate, coming from somewhere inside the burning section of forest. Dara did not hesitate long. She pulled her bandana up over her mouth and nose, checked the knife in her right boot out of pure habit, and walked into the trees. The smoke hit her immediately, not the thin wisps visible from the road, but a heavier layer moving through the undergrowth at knee height, acrid and thick. She kept her eyes moving. The fire was perhaps 150 yards to her right, and closing, feeding on the dried ferns and fallen needles that carpeted the forest floor. The sound of it was growing a low roar punctuated by sharp cracking sounds as branches caught. She called out, not loudly, loud enough. "Hey, where are you? Keep talking." A cough, then a voice closer than she expected. "Here, please, I'm tied up." Dara moved towards the sound, pushing through a stand of young firs ducking under a low branch. The smoke thickened. Her eyes were watering. She kept moving. She found her 30 yards further in. A little girl, 6 years old, maybe 7 at the outside. She was wearing a yellow dress that had been cleaned that morning and was now smeared with dirt and ash. Pink sneakers scuffed from struggling. Her hair was dark and tangled, her face tracked with tears that had cut clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. Her arms were pulled behind her wrists, bound to the trunk of a Douglas fir. With a length of rough rope, her small back pressed against the bark. The fire was 40 feet away, maybe less, crawling through the underbrush toward her with a kind of lazy inevitability, like it had all the time in the world. Dara crossed the remaining distance in seconds, dropping to her knees in front of the child. The girl's eyes were huge, terrified. But something shifted in them when she saw Dara, not relief exactly, not yet, but the fragile first edge of it, the way a drowning person looks when a hand reaches toward them from above. "I've got you," Dara said. She didn't waste time on the knots. She reached down, pulled the knife from her boot, and pressed the flat of the blade briefly against her own forearm so the child could see it clearly before she moved it toward the rope. "I'm cutting you loose. Hold still." The girl went rigid against the tree, pressing herself into the bark. Her gaze fixed on the knife with a fear that mixed with the fire fear into something almost unbearable to look at. But she held still. She was braver than most adults Dara had known. The rope was thick, good quality, 3-strand twisted nylon, the kind that didn't come from a hardware store bargain bin. And the knot. Dara's hands moved automatically to work the blade under it, and as she did, something registered that she stored away immediately for later. The knot was a Ranger hitch, doubled and set with a secondary half hitch to prevent slipping. Clean, tight, professional. The kind of restraint that took specific knowledge to tie correctly. This was not the work of someone acting in panic or blind rage. This was the work of someone who knew how to secure a person. The rope parted under the blade. The girl's arms dropped forward, and she stumbled, and Dara caught her with both hands, the knife already away, her arms wrapping around the small body. She stood up fast, settling the girl against her chest, one hand at the back of her head. "Close your eyes. Put your face here." She pressed the girl's face into the front of her jacket. "Don't look up." The fire was 30 feet away now. The heat pressed against the right side of Dara's face like an open oven. She took 1 second to scan the trees, reading the gaps in the smoke, the way she had learned to read roads, where the opening was, where the clear path lay, how much time she had before it closed. Then she ran. The girl weighed almost nothing. That was the thought that struck her as she moved. This child weighed next to nothing. And someone had tied her to a tree inside a burning forest to die. The weight of that fact settled into Dara's chest alongside the weight of the child herself, and she ran harder, picking her path through the trees, jumping a smoldering log, ducking left to avoid a curtain of sparks that cascaded down from a branch that had just caught. A wall of fire rose up suddenly in front of her, not solid but a line of burning ground between two trees that had become a nearly continuous curtain of flame. No way around it, not enough time. Dara pulled the jacket over the girl's head, shielding her completely, turned her own face away, and drove through it. 3 steps, maybe 4. The heat on her left arm was sudden and total, a physical force rather than a temperature, and she felt the skin on her forearm tighten and blister in the second she was inside it. Then she was through, stumbling onto cooler ground, smoke-blinded, coughing hard. She didn't stop moving. She didn't stop until she broke out of the tree line and felt the gravel of the shoulder under her boots. The road, the bike, open air. She carried the girl 10 more feet away from the forest edge and went to one knee, setting her down, gently pulling the jacket back from her face. The child looked up at her with ash-streaked and red-rimmed eyes. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Dara looked at her left forearm. The burn was already angry and blistered from wrist to elbow, red and tight. She looked at the girl's arms, her legs, her face. No burns. The jacket had done its job. She looked back at the forest where the fire was fully visible now, through the tree line moving east with the wind, orange and relentless. "What's your name?" Dara asked. The girl's voice was a thread. "Lily. Lily." Dara nodded once, the way she confirmed a road marker, noting it, filing it, moving on. "I'm Dara. We need to go. Can you walk?" Lily looked at her legs as if checking, then back up. She nodded. "Okay, stay close." Dara walked her to the bike, positioned her on the seat in front of her, and wrapped one arm around her as she started the engine with the other. The Harley growled to life. Dara pulled onto the highway and pointed them north, away from the fire, away from the column of smoke that was already visible against the evening sky. She drove with one arm around a child she had never met, and the blistered skin on her forearm throbbed with every heartbeat, and the road unspooled ahead of her, and she did not once look back. There was a diner 14 miles north on the highway, a place Dara had noted on her way down 2 days ago, the way she noted all potential stops, fuel, food, rest cover. A place called Haller's, sitting alone on the east side of the road with a gravel lot and a hand-painted sign and a neon open indicator in the window that still worked. She had clocked it the way she clocked everything useful, deliberately, without slowing down, tucking it into the back of her mind where practical information lived. She pulled into the lot as the last light left the sky. The woman who came to the door when the bell rang was in her 60s, solidly built with silver hair, pulled back in a practical twist, and the kind of face that had spent decades making quick assessments of people who walked through the door. Her name was Bev Haller. Dara would learn that in the first 30 seconds. She had run this diner for 30 years, and before that she had spent 12 years as an ER nurse in Roseburg. And both of those facts were immediately evident in the way she looked at Dara and the child, and said nothing dramatic, just stepped back from the door and said, "Come in, sit down, let me see." She flipped the open sign to closed without being asked. She put Lily in a booth with a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate and sat across from her, while Dara stood near the counter, left arm cradled against her chest. Bev cleaned the burn with practiced efficiency, wrapping the forearm in gauze from a first aid kit that was better stocked than most rural diners bothered to maintain. She worked without commentary, asking only the questions that mattered. Did she inhale much smoke? Some. She was coughing when I found her. It's clearing. How long was she in there? No way to know. Long enough. Bev looked up from the bandaging. Her gray eyes were steady and direct. Someone tied her there. Yes. A pause. The gauze kept moving. The rope marks on her wrists. Yes. Bev looked at Lily across the diner, where the girl sat with both hands around the mug, staring at the surface of the hot chocolate. Then she looked back at Dara. Something passed between them. Not words, not even an understanding exactly, but an acknowledgement. A recognition of the category of thing they were dealing with. Over the next hour, Lily talked. Not a flood, not the breathless confession of a child desperate to tell someone everything. It came in pieces in the halting way that frightened children speak, when they have been taught by experience rather than instruction that saying the wrong thing in front of the wrong person has consequences. Dara sat across from her and listened without pushing, refilling the hot chocolate when it ran low, eating nothing herself. Her stepfather's name was Marcus. He had a truck. He wore a silver watch. He had a temper that lived behind a normal face and came out without warning. Her mother. Ren had gone away 3 weeks ago, not gone like a trip, gone like something Lily couldn't find the right word for. Gone like something bad had happened, but no one had explained what. Marcus had said she ran away. Lily did not believe this. Lily's voice when she said this was quiet and certain in a way that made it completely convincing. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. A man came to the house at night when she was supposed to be asleep. She had come downstairs because she was thirsty. The man and Marcus were in the kitchen. The man had a shaved head and a scar on his chin and a tattoo on his forearm she'd seen clearly when he moved his hand under the kitchen light. A ring of flames around a wheel, a dagger through the center. They were talking quietly and they were angry, and she had hidden behind the doorframe and watched. And then Marcus had turned and seen her. After that, things changed. The way he looked at her changed. And then this afternoon, he had driven her into the forest and walked her to the tree and told her it was a game. And when she realized it wasn't a game, it was already too late. He had said before he left, "No one can know what you saw, Lily. No one." Dara sat across from the girl and looked at her face, 6 years old. Yellow dress, pink sneakers, hands wrapped around a mug. The fire she had pulled her out of was already reported on the radio above the counter. A Forest Service bulletin about a wildfire in Douglas County cause under investigation. The cause was not under investigation. Dara knew exactly what the cause was. It was sitting across from her in a yellow dress, drinking hot chocolate. She excused herself and walked to the back of the diner, to the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the storage room, and took out the phone she kept in the inside pocket of her jacket. Not the phone registered to any name, the other one. The one with the number she called maybe 3 times a year, and only when it mattered. It rang twice. Tuck. A voice like gravel and old leather. "Well, been a while. I need information, fast. For you always. What's the name?" "Marcus Reed." The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. That was enough to tell her something. Tuck did not pause for nothing. "Where are you right now, Dara?" "Why?" "Because that name isn't a name you say out loud in an unsecured location, and wherever you are, you need to know what you're dealing with before you take another step." Another pause, shorter. Marcus Reed was Hell's Angels Oregon chapter approximately 8 years ago. Bounced out around the time you were still around that time. The reasons are not small. "Tell me." 3 women connected to him, all gone within a 2-year window. No bodies ever found, no charges ever filed. The kind of situation where everyone knew and no one could prove it. Tuck's voice dropped further. Since the club cut him loose, he's been building something on the outside. Word is he's been doing business with the Vasquez organization. Logistics, mostly moving product through his shipping company. Legitimate front, real ugly back end. Dara leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling. "He's offering $15,000, Tuck said, "for information on a child. 6 years old, dark hair, tied to a specific description. The offer went out 3 days ago through old contacts. He's calling in every favor, reaching into every corner." "I know the child." Another silence. Different quality this time. "Dara?" "She's with me." "Then you need to listen carefully." Tuck's voice shifted, not more urgent urgency was always there, but more precise. "The offer is on the network. Old friends, old enemies, people who owe him, people who just need the money. 15,000 is real money. It loosens people who wouldn't otherwise move. You cannot trust anyone who knew you before and knows that name. Dara thought of the list of people who fit that description. It was not a short list. Anyone I can trust. One, maybe. A pause. Boone is still in the area, still running the chapter. He remembers what Reed did before he was pushed out. He was the one who pushed hardest. And he remembers you. The pause that followed carried weight. If things go sideways, Dara and you need someone at your back. Tell me where you are, and I'll pass the coordinates to Boone. His people will come if it comes to that. This mattered. She processed it with precision the way she processed road conditions and fuel levels and distances between towns. Not something to use carelessly, but something to know was there. One more thing, she said. The tattoo ring of flames around a wheeled dagger through the center. What is that? The pause before Tuck answered was the longest yet. That, he said carefully, is the Hellfire Wheel, inner circle of a specific organization I won't name on this line. People who wear that don't wear it casually. That's not a tattoo you get. That's a tattoo you earn in ways you don't want to know about. A breath. The man who visited Reed, if Lily saw that tattoo clearly, she can identify a made member of a very serious organization. That's why Reed is desperate. That's why he's willing to burn a forest and a 6-year-old girl to make the problem go away. Dara ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment. The burn on her forearm pulsed steadily under the gauze. She walked back out to the diner. Bev was at the counter, wiping it down in the slow circular way of someone who is occupying their hands while their mind works elsewhere. She looked up when Dara came back, and in her expression was the question she hadn't yet asked. Dara sat down across from Lily, who had finished the hot chocolate and was now drawing on a paper napkin with a pen she'd found somewhere, small, careful lines forming the outline of a house. Lily, Dara said, I need to ask you something. The girl looked up. The man who came to your house, the one with the tattoo. Dara kept her voice level and easy, nothing in it to frighten. Was there anything else you remember about him? Anything at all? Lily set down the pen. She thought about it seriously, the way children think when they're trying to be genuinely helpful and they understand that this is important. He had a red box, she said finally. He gave it to Marcus. They were both looking inside it. She paused. And his ring. It had a stone in it, green. It caught the light when he moved his hand. Dara nodded. Good. That's very good, Lily. She looked at the drawing on the napkin, a simple house, 4 windows, a door, a tree to one side. Is that your house? Our house. Mine and Mama's. Lily touched the tree in the drawing. Mama had a swing on this tree. She said it was magic. The words sat between them for a moment. Your mama sounds like someone who planned ahead, Dara said. Something shifted in Lily's expression. A decision being made, the kind of decision you can watch a child make when they're deciding whether to trust. Lily looked at her steadily for a long moment. Then she reached into her backpack, the small pink bag she'd had on her back when Dara found her still there, and began to feel around the bottom with her small fingers. Mama gave me something, she said. It's secret. She looked up. Do you promise? Cross my heart, Dara said, and made the gesture over her chest. Lily found what she was looking for. She pressed her thumb along the inner seam of the backpack's lining, and a section of stitching gave way, revealing a narrow pocket sewn between the fabric layers, completely invisible if you didn't know where to look. From inside this hidden space, she withdrew a locket. Silver heart-shaped, tarnished with age, heavier than its size suggested. Delicate filigree work on its surface. The kind of thing that had been made to last. She held it out to Dara. Dara took it carefully, turned it over in her hands. The locket felt wrong for its size, too heavy, which meant something was inside beyond what you'd expect. She looked at Lily. There's a trick, Lily said. Mama showed me. She took it back, pressed her thumb firmly against a specific point on the lower edge, and the locket opened, not from the middle, as most lockets do, but from the bottom, hinging open to reveal a small compartment that was not designed for photographs. Inside the compartment was a piece of paper folded tight. Lily unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the table between them. The handwriting was small and neat and deliberate, the writing of someone who was trying to put a great deal of information into very little space. Dara read it once, then again. Lighthouse Point Cabin. The key opens the desk. Trust only the angels. Below the words, a small drawing, a lighthouse with a spiral pattern near its beacon, precise and unmistakable. Lily touched the drawing with one finger. "We went camping there," she said. "Me and Mama. She said it was our special place because nobody knew about it." Her voice was quiet. "She told me that if something bad ever happened, I should follow the hidden light." She looked up at Dara with eyes that held something ancient and undeserved in a 6-year-old's face. She said she'd be there. She promised. Dara sat with this for a moment. The fire in the forest, the professional knot, the ranger hitch that spoke of training, the locket hidden in a false pocket in a child's backpack, the message that assumed the child would survive to read it, which meant the mother had planned for a scenario in which she did not survive herself, or at least could not be present to guide her daughter. Wren Dawson had seen something coming. She had prepared for it as best she could in secret while the clock was running. Dara looked at the lighthouse symbol, small spiral near the beacon. "Do you know where Lighthouse Point is?" she asked. Lily nodded. "It's by the ocean, where the big rocks are. There's a real lighthouse, but nobody uses it anymore. Our cabin is in the trees behind it." She paused. "Mama showed me the way. I think I remember." Dara folded the paper with careful hands and returned it to the locket and returned the locket to Lily, who tucked it against her chest. She was about to speak when Bev appeared beside the table, moving quietly for a woman her size, and leaned down to speak at a level that didn't carry past the three of them. "2 men came in 20 minutes ago," Bev said. "Corner booth. They ordered coffee and haven't touched it." She paused. "The big one. I know his face." Dara did not look toward the corner. She held very still. "Grady Moss," Bev said. "He used to come through here a few years back when he was running with a group out of Coos Bay. He's not a man who drives 40 miles for bad coffee." Grady Moss. Dara knew the name. She had known Grady in a different chapter of her life, not a friend, but a face she'd seen at enough gatherings that the face was familiar. The kind of man who kept track of favors owed and was always quietly calculating the value of information. $15,000 would be very straightforward math for Grady Moss. The problem was that Grady had seen her come in. He had seen her with Lily. And now he was sitting in a corner booth with untouched coffee, which meant he was not here for the coffee. He was deciding whether the woman with the child was the woman he thought she was, and whether that information was worth a phone call. She looked at Lily, who was watching her face with those careful eyes. "Lily," she said, keeping her voice even and easy, "we're going to go out the back in a few minutes. This is not a problem. We're just going somewhere better, okay?" Lily looked at her steadily, then nodded. Dara reached into the jacket, took out the clean phone, and sent a text to the number Tuck had given her for Boone. Coordinates of the diner, a single line underneath. "If 8 hours pass without contact from me, come to the last known location and be ready for trouble." She hit send and put the phone away. Bev met her eyes across the table. An understanding passed between them, quick and complete, the way it does between two people who have both spent time in environments where reading a situation fast was a survival skill. "Back door," Bev said. "My truck's on the service side. Keys are on the hook by the freezer." "You don't have to come," Dara said. Bev looked at her with 30 years of watching people walk through her door in various states of trouble, and 12 years of ER nights before that. "Go tell those men their coffee's free," she said quietly. meaning she would handle the distraction herself. "I'll be right behind you." Lily slid out of the booth on her own backpack on her shoulders and stood beside Dara. She reached up and took Dara's hand. The gesture was simple, completely unrehearsed. A 6-year-old's instinct for proximity to the safest thing available. Dara looked down at the small hand in hers, at the gauze bandages on Lily's wrists where the rope had cut, at the yellow dress with the ash smudge on the shoulder that nobody had thought to change yet. Something shifted in her chest. Not softness exactly, not the kind of thing she would have named out loud. Something more like calibration. A settling of the thing that had been unsettled for 20 years into a new configuration aimed at something with weight and purpose. She closed her hand around Lily's. "Stay behind me," she said. "We're going out the back." Outside, the Oregon night was dark and cool and smelled of pine resin and the distant char of the forest fire still burning somewhere to the south. Bev's truck was where she'd said it was Old Blue, a working vehicle rather than a kept one. The keys were on the hook by the freezer. Dara helped Lily into the cab, climbed in behind the wheel, and waited for Bev to come through the back door. While she waited, she looked through the windshield at the dark tree line at the edge of the service lot. At the darkness beyond it, Ren Dawson was out there somewhere, hiding in a place she had chosen specifically because no one knew about it, waiting in whatever condition she was in because she had made a promise to a 6-year-old girl and intended to keep it. The back door opened, and Bev came through it moving quickly and without drama, and climbed into the passenger seat. She pulled the door shut without slamming it. "Grady's still in there," she said. "But he's on his phone." Dara started the engine. "Lily," she said, "I need you to think carefully. The road to Lighthouse Point. What's the first thing you remember about how to get there?" Lily thought for 3 seconds. "There's a sign that someone drew extra eyes on. Mama said it looked like a funny face." "Which highway?" "The one that goes to the ocean. We always went at night because Mama said the stars were better." "Coastal Highway. That's enough to start." Dara put the truck in reverse and backed carefully out of the lot, headlights off, until they reached the road. Then she turned north, away from the diner, away from Grady Moss and his phone call, away from the fire still burning 20 miles south. The dark road opened up ahead of them. The trees closed in on both sides. The stars above the canopy were thick and cold and bright, the way they only get in places where the light pollution hasn't reached yet. What Dara understood clearly, and had understood from the moment Bev said Grady's name, was that Grady had not confirmed anything yet. He had seen a woman matching a general description come into a diner with a dark-haired child. He didn't know for certain it was Dara until he'd had more time to study her face and perhaps recognize something else, a mannerism, the way she moved, the way she sat in the booth. He would have been cautious about calling Reed with bad information. A false lead would cost him credibility and possibly the reward. So he would have watched, calculated, waited for confirmation. And then Dara had used Bev's phone to call Tuck. Grady, sitting in the corner booth, would not have been able to hear the conversation. But he might have seen Bev's phone in Dara's hand, might have noted the area code, or recognized the pattern of behavior. A woman making a careful, quiet call from someone else's phone rather than her own. That kind of tradecraft was recognizable to people who'd practiced it themselves. And if Grady had recognized Tuck's contact signature, because Tuck had been known for years to anyone who moved in those circles, then Grady would have had his confirmation, not certainty, but enough to make the call worth making. She had been careful. She had not been careful enough. These were not contradictory statements. Sometimes careful wasn't sufficient. And understanding that without beating yourself over, it was a lesson that had taken her years to learn. What mattered now was where they were going and how fast Reed could close the distance. "You doing okay back there?" Dara asked. Lily was sitting between them, her small body upright in the cab, looking through the windshield at the dark road. "I'm okay," she said. Then, "Are we going to find Mama?" "That's the plan." Lily was quiet for a moment. She's hurt, she said. I could feel it when I think about her. Dara said nothing. She had learned in the past few hours that Lily's instincts were worth taking seriously. Bev had been quiet for most of the drive. This was one of the things Dara was finding she appreciated about the woman. She did not fill silence for the sake of filling it. She watched the road and the mirror, and occasionally looked at Lily, the kind of woman who had seen enough of the world's difficult hours to know when talking helped and when it didn't. She's been running on pure fear since before you found her, Bev said quietly, when Lily's breathing had deepened and her head had dropped slightly toward Dara's arm. Children that age, they can hold themselves together for longer than you'd think when they have to. But it costs them. I know. She trusts you, Bev said. Dara kept her eyes on the road. She trusts the situation. She doesn't have another option. That's not what I saw, Bev said, and left it there. The coastal highway came at them out of the dark like a revelation. They had been driving inland roads for nearly 2 hours, narrow tree-canopied county routes that Dara had chosen specifically because they did not show up on the kind of navigation apps that strangers use to follow other strangers. Roads that required local knowledge or a very good paper map. Roads that twisted through the Douglas fir wilderness of western Oregon without apology, rising and falling with the terrain, crossing unnamed creeks on single-lane bridges made of concrete and old rebar. Roads that were inconvenient enough to discourage casual travel. The coastal highway was different. It opened up ahead of them like a long exhale, 2 lanes of clean pavement running north-south along the edge of the continent, the Pacific invisible to their left in the darkness, but present in every other sense in the smell of salt and cold water that came through the truck's slightly open window, in the sound of distant surf that rose and fell beneath the engine noise, in the way the air changed quality entirely from the dry pine resin smell of the inland forests to something older and wider and indifferent to human problems. Lily stirred. She had been asleep against Dara's right arm somewhere around the 40-minute mark. Her head a warm and trusting weight, her breathing deep and even. She lifted her head now and looked out the window with the immediate alertness of a child who had trained herself not to wake slowly. She looked at the darkness to the left, processed the smell, processed the sound. We're on the ocean road, she said. That's right, Dara said. Lily sat up straight and looked ahead through the windshield. I remember this part. She pointed ahead and slightly right. There's a sign coming, a big green one. Someone painted extra eyes on the man in the picture. Mama laughed every time we passed it. Dara watched the roadside. 2 miles of dark highway slid past them. Then the headlights caught it, a green informational sign, standard state highway issue, depicting a figure in a hard hat to indicate a work zone ahead. Someone at some point had taken yellow spray paint and added 2 large round eyes to the figure's face, giving it an expression of wide-eyed alarm that was in context genuinely funny. There, Lily said. Bev made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Dara turned right at the intersection 50 yards past the sign onto a road that went from pavement to gravel in the space of a quarter-mile, and from gravel to packed dirt shortly after that. The truck's suspension communicated its objection through the steering wheel. The tree canopy closed back in overhead, blocking the stars. The headlights threw harsh shadows between the trunks. How much further? Dara asked. There's a tree, Lily said. It bends, like it's trying to touch the ground on one side, and then a big rock with moss on it, and after that a place where 2 streams cross the road close together, and you have to drive through the water. She paused. Mama always made me close my eyes for the water part, and then open them and say what I wished for. Bev looked at Dara over the top of Lily's head. The look said several things without words. The bent tree appeared in the headlights 12 minutes later, exactly as described, a large fir that had grown at a severe angle, perhaps from a long-ago snow load, its upper trunk curving back toward the horizontal like a question mark. The moss-covered boulder was another 6 minutes on, The double stream crossing came after that, and the truck splashed through both in low gear. The water no more than 8 inches deep, but cold enough to hear against the undercarriage. Lily opened her eyes after the second crossing. 2 wishes, she said quietly, more to herself than to them. She did not share what they were. The forest thinned. Ahead, through a break in the trees, the darkness changed quality, became broader, less enclosed. The sound of surf grew louder, separating from background into foreground. And then the headlights found the lighthouse. It stood on a headland perhaps 300 yards ahead at the edge of a cliff that dropped to the water. A classic Pacific Coast tower, maybe 60 feet tall, built of stone that had been whitewashed once and was now weathered to a mottled gray. The lamp room at the top was dark, had been dark for years by the look of it. A chain-link fence surrounded the base, rusted and sagging in several places. The beam that should have swept the water was absent. Whatever automated system had replaced the keeper in this lighthouse had itself been replaced by nothing at all, decommissioned, left to the weather and the cormorants and the slow, patient work of salt air on stone. Dara pulled the truck to a stop in a clearing at the edge of the tree line and cut the headlights. She sat for a moment in the dark, listening. Wind, surf, the tick of the cooling engine. Nothing else. "The cabin is in the trees," Lily said. "Not by the lighthouse, on the other side of the clearing. There's a path." Dara scanned the clearing, the tree line on the far side, the cliff edge, the dark lighthouse. No other vehicles, no light sources beyond the stars, no sounds that didn't belong to the landscape. She got out of the truck. The night air hit her with full force, cold, salt-saturated, clean in the way that coastal Oregon air is clean when the wind is coming off the water. She stood beside the truck and gave it 30 seconds. The way she had always given new environments 30 seconds before moving through them. Letting the place settle around her. Letting her eyes and ears adjust. Nothing. Just the night. She opened the passenger door for Lily, who climbed down and stood beside her. Bev came around the front of the truck, moving quietly. They crossed the clearing in single file, Dara first, Lily behind her. Bev last toward the tree line on the far side. The path was there, barely visible in the starlight, more a slight parting of the undergrowth than a maintained trail, but real. Someone had walked it enough times that the ferns along its edges were compressed the ground, slightly more bare than the surrounding forest floor. Lily navigated it from memory and touch, occasionally pausing to find her bearing, once crouching to look at the ground, where two paths diverged, and choosing the left fork with quiet confidence. "Mama tied a ribbon on that branch once," she said, pointing to a tree. "It's gone now, but I remember where it was." They walked for 10 minutes through the dark forest, Dara watching every direction before the path opened into a small clearing, and the cabin was in front of them. It was smaller than Dara had imagined. One-story stone foundation walls of weathered cedar that had gone silver-gray from decades of coastal air. A covered porch, the width of the front wall, 2 steps up from the ground. 2 windows shuttered from the inside. A door with no welcome mat and no decorative wreath. A functional door on a functional building. A place designed to be used rather than admired. No footprints in the soft ground around it. No disturbed vegetation on the approach. Cobwebs across the lower corner of the porch railing. No one had been here recently, at least not through the front. Dara held up her hand and they stopped at the clearing's edge. She watched the cabin for a full minute. Then she moved forward, leaving Lily with Bev, and circled the building at a distance of about 15 feet, checking angles. The rear of the cabin backed against a hillside that rose steeply through the trees. A narrow gap between the rear wall and the slope, maybe 4 feet of clearance. Enough for a person, barely. She noted it and moved on. She came back to the front. "The key," she said to Lily. Lily reached into the collar of her dress and drew out a slender chain, the one Dara had noticed briefly, but not examined. On the end of it hung a small key, silver. Its teeth cut in an unusual pattern, not a standard house key, something more specific. Lily stood on her toes at the door lock and inserted the key. It turned with a single clean click. The door opened inward on hinges that had been recently oiled, the only sign of recent maintenance on an otherwise weathered structure. The smell that came out was cedar and salt, and something slightly stale but not unpleasant. Dara entered first. The interior was one main room, small kitchen area in the far corner, a table with two chairs, a short sofa against the left wall, a shelf of paperback books with bleached spines, a wood stove in the corner with a small stack of split logs beside it, everything covered in a thin uniform layer of dust, undisturbed, except for one thing: a single path of footprints on the dusty floor, made by bare feet, small adult, coming from the front door, crossing to the kitchen area, then to the far right wall, then back. Recent enough that the edges were still crisp. Someone had been here, had moved through this room on a specific route, and had not disturbed the dust anywhere else. The hidden light, Lily said. She was looking at the ceiling. Dara followed her gaze. A simple round light fixture ceiling, mounted the kind you'd find in 10,000 rural cabins. Nothing remarkable about it, nothing that drew the eye. Mama showed me, Lily said. She pulled the table to the center of the room and climbed up on it and stood on her toes and pressed her palm flat against the center of the fixture. Nothing. She adjusted her hand slightly, pressing with her thumb at a point near the lower edge. The fixture clicked, rotated a quarter turn. A small panel in the ceiling opened, hinged flush to the plaster, invisible when closed, obvious when open. A hollow space above the panel, maybe 6 inches deep. Inside the space, a single folded piece of paper and a small key on a plain ring. Lily took them down and handed them to Dara. Dara unfolded the paper, a hand-drawn map, rough but functional. The cabin at the bottom of the page labeled with a small square. A line leading from the rear of the cabin up through what was clearly the hillside, following a switchback path. At the end of the path, a rectangle with a door symbol built into the slope, the way root cellars were built in older rural construction. Beside the rectangle, a small symbol, the same lighthouse spiral from the locket note. Beneath the map, in the same small, neat handwriting, the key opens the door. I'll be waiting. W. Dara read it twice. Then she looked at Lily, who was looking at the map with an expression that contained 6 years of missing her mother, compressed into a single moment. She's here, Lily said, not a question. Let's go find out, Dara said. They went out the back. The path up the hillside was narrow and steep-cut between dense salal and sword fern that grabbed at their clothes and made the footing uncertain in the dark. Dara went first with Bev's small flashlight held low to the ground, lighting the immediate path without advertising their presence to the landscape. Lily climbed behind her, sure-footed in the way children are on terrain they've navigated before. Bev came last, breathing steadily, not complaining. The hillside leveled into a small natural shelf about 40 feet up, where the rock face created a shallow overhang. In the overhang's shadow, dense ferns grew against the stone face in a mass that looked entirely natural. Lily walked straight to a specific section of fern and pulled it aside without hesitation, the way you move a curtain you've moved before. Behind it was a door, small wooden built flush into a gap in the rock face, and painted to match the stone and lichen, painted by someone who had taken the time to get it right, who had studied the colors carefully. The wood was old but solid. The lock was a standard deadbolt, the same style as the key Dara held. She inserted the key. The lock turned. Dara pulled the door open and in the same motion moved in front of Lily, putting herself between the child and whatever was inside. The darkness beyond the door was absolute for a moment. Then a sound, a shifting, a catch of breath. Lily pushed past Dara's arm. "Mama." A voice came out of the darkness, thin and fractured with emotion. "Lily, baby, is that you?" And then Lily was inside, and Dara stood in the doorway and let her go. The space beyond the door was larger than expected. A proper room, roughly 12 by 15, with rough stone walls and a floor of packed earth covered with a wooden pallet. A battery-powered lantern sat on a low shelf, and when Dara found the switch and turned it on, the light it threw was warm and yellow and sufficient. The room had been provisioned a folding cot, a shelf of canned goods and bottled water, a chemical toilet behind a canvas curtain in one corner, a small propane camp stove, a first aid kit, and on the floor near the cot, a waterproof storage box with a combination lock. On the cot, sitting up with her daughter wrapped around her, and her face wet with tears, was Wren Dawson, 32 years old but looking older right now. Dark circles deep under her eyes, face drawn and pale with the particular pallor that comes from weeks of insufficient food and no sunlight. Her hair was darker than Lily's cut, practically short. Her right arm was wrapped from wrist to mid-forearm in bandaging that had been changed recently, the outer layer clean. But the smell in the room carried the faint biological undertone of a wound that was fighting an infection. It was not quite winning. She held Lily with her left arm fiercely, both of them crying in the way that doesn't need sound, or rather produces a sound that is below language, older than language, the sound of a specific absence ending. Dara stood near the door and gave them time. Bev came in behind her and stood beside her. Neither spoke. It was several minutes before Wren looked up. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swimming, found Dara's face and stayed there. She took in the jacket, the bandaged arm, the knife at the boot, the face that was not soft and not hard, but something more practical than either. "You found her," Wren said. Her voice was rough from disuse and emotion. "She found me," Dara said. Wren shook her head slightly. "Who are you?" "Dara Cole. I was riding the highway south of Sutherland this afternoon when I heard her in the fire." Something moved through Wren's face, the full understanding of what that sentence contained. Everything it implied about what had nearly happened. She pulled Lily tighter against her and for a moment closed her eyes. "He tied her to a tree," Wren said. Not a question. Her voice was very quiet. "Yes. He was going to let the fire." She stopped, started again. "He told me she was with her grandmother. I believed him. God help me, I believed." "She's here," Dara said. "She's fine. We can do the rest later." Wren opened her eyes, looked at Lily's face, looked back at Dara. In her expression was gratitude of a depth that didn't have a social form, the kind that goes beyond what words are built to carry. She seemed to understand this because she didn't try to speak it. She just held her daughter's face in her hand for a moment and breathed. Bev was already kneeling beside the cot, unwrapping the bandage on Wren's right arm with the efficient care of someone who had done clinical work. She examined the wound beneath a deep laceration, ragged at the edges, the surrounding skin showing the warmth and color of early infection. She looked up at Dara. Her expression said manageable but time-sensitive. "How long?" Bev asked Wren. 10 days. I was trying to fix the generator and the housing slipped." Wren looked at her arm. "I cleaned it as well as I could. I couldn't risk going to a hospital." "You'll need antibiotics. We have some basics in the kit." Bev was already opening the first aid box on the shelf. "This will hold for now." While Bev worked on the arm, Dara crouched beside the waterproof box on the floor. "What's in here?" Wren looked at it. "Everything. 6 months of work." She met Dara's eyes. "Bank records, shipping manifest with the real contents documented against the declared contents. Photographs, recordings of 4 separate conversations, 2 of which include names I won't say out loud right now." She paused. "There's something else. Something I didn't understand until about 3 weeks ago, right before everything fell apart." Her voice lowered. "Marcus isn't just working for the Vasquez organization. He's been running a separate operation on the side using Vasquez infrastructure without their knowledge. Skimming cargo, building his own network. If Vasquez knew, he'd be dead," Dara said, "which means he needs that box destroyed and everyone who knows what's in it gone. Not just for the law, for his own survival." Wren looked at Lily, who was pressed against her side, listening with the focused attention of a child who understands more than adults give credit for. "He can't afford witnesses, not from any direction." Then Wren looked at the box again, something crossing her face, a decision being made in real time. "There's something else," she said. "4 days ago, when I realized I couldn't get out of here on my own, my arm was getting worse. I couldn't manage the climb down without risk. I did something." She paused. "I have a contact at the FBI field office in Portland. Agent Sandra Kerr, Organized Crime Division. We'd crossed paths 2 years ago on something unrelated, and she gave me her card. I still had it." She looked at Dara steadily. "I sent her a full copy of everything in that box, through a dead drop I set up months ago. A digital dead man switch if I don't call her by 6 a.m. to confirm I'm safe and ambulatory. She files an active investigation report and opens the package." Bev had gone still at her work, listening. Dara looked at Wren for a long moment. "You sent it 4 days ago." 4 days ago, before you arrived, before any of this." Wren's voice was level and direct. "I'm telling you now because if we get separated, if something goes wrong and I can't make the call, you need to know that the clock is running, regardless of what happens to me." Dara absorbed this, filed it exactly where it needed to be. The weight of this settled into the room. Evidence with this kind of reach, this could end Marcus Reed's operation completely. But it could also paint a target on everyone in this room that would not fade when Reed went to prison. The Vasquez organization did not forgive information leaks. They settled those accounts regardless of how long it took. This needed to reach the right people. Federal people, not local. And it needed to do so in a way that put a legal structure around Wren and Lily before Marcus Reed's lawyers could construct a different narrative. She was working through this, turning it over, when the sound reached them from outside. Engines. More than one. On the path below. Not the distant rumble of highway traffic. The specific sound of vehicles moving carefully over rough terrain. The particular hesitation of an SUV chassis navigating a road that wasn't made for it. The kind of careful movement that meant the drivers were trying not to announce themselves. Dara was at the door, in 3 steps, easing it open a crack. Below, through the trees at the edge of the clearing, where they had left Bev's truck headlights. 3 sets. Vehicles parked in a formation that blocked the clearing's exit. Doors opening. Figures moving in the darkness, not using flashlights, which meant they knew the terrain, or didn't need light to find what they were looking for. They had found the cabin, which meant they had found the path, which meant they knew more than they should have known. Dara pulled the door closed and turned to the room. "How many ways out of here?" she asked Wren. Wren was already lifting Lily and sitting her on the cot with steady hands. The mother's fear was fully present in her face, but her movements were controlled. "There's a second passage, behind the canvas curtain past the toilet. It goes through the rock for about 20 feet and comes out in a stand of salal on the east side of the hill. I built it as a second exit when I set this place up." She looked at Dara. "I planned for this." "How long to get through it?" "For her and me, maybe 5 minutes. It's low, you have to crawl." Dara calculated. 5 minutes was both enough and not enough, depending on how fast the men below moved, and whether they knew about the bunker or were still searching the cabin. "They knew where to look," Bev said quietly. She was standing near the door, the practical part of her mind already working the problem. "Not from today. They found the cabin too directly. Someone told them about this place before tonight." Wren's face changed. Something cold passed through it. "My mother," she said. Her voice was careful and empty, in the way voices get when a person is holding something very painful at arm's length. "She had a small stroke 2 weeks ago. She's in the hospital in Coos Bay. Marcus went to visit her." She stopped, started again. "She didn't know it was secret. I never told her it was secret. She just knew it as the place I took Lily camping. She would have mentioned it the way you mention anything." A long breath. "She wouldn't have known." No one in the room said anything to fill this silence. It didn't need filling. "He knew about the cabin for 2 weeks, Dara said. He didn't come because he didn't know where the bunker was. He was waiting for someone to lead him to it. She thought about what she now understood about Grady Moss. Grady had seen her in the diner. He had been uncertain, a woman matching a description, a dark-haired child, but not enough for a confident call. Then she had used Bev's phone. The phone that Reed had already compromised with tracking software 3 weeks ago when he had visited the diner with the concern of a man covering every angle. The location data from that call would have pinged Reed's monitoring software the moment the phone was used, confirming not just the identity of who held it, but the direction of travel. Coastal highway, north. That was the primary track. Reed had the location from the phone. But Grady's call had been the secondary confirmation, the human intelligence that arrived alongside the technical data and reinforced it. Grady had recognized enough about Dara's behavior in the diner to call Reed and say he was confident the woman was Dara Cole, heading north with the child using tradecraft that suggested she knew she was being looked for. Two separate information streams arriving at Reed simultaneously, pointing in the same direction. Neither one alone was definitive. Together, they were enough. He used two ways to find us, Dara said to Wren. His tracking software on Bev's phone confirmed the direction. Grady Moss, an old acquaintance who spotted me in the diner, called in a visual confirmation. He had both feeds pointing here before we even reached the coast. She paused. Which means he's been careful and he's been patient, and that makes him more dangerous than if he'd just come in swinging. Wren absorbed this. Then she straightened and looked at her daughter, and something in her face resolved into a hard clarity. Then we need to make sure he doesn't get what he came for. She looked at the waterproof box. And we need to make sure that box gets to people who can use it. One problem at a time, Dara said. First problem is the next 10 minutes. She looked at Wren, then at Bev, then at Lily. Wren, you and Lily take the second passage now. Move as fast as you can. Once you're out the east side, go north along the ridgeline and stay in the trees. Do not go back toward the clearing. Wren nodded. She was already on her feet, moving to the canvas curtain, pulling it aside. The second passage beyond it was low and dark, exactly as described. The box comes with you, Dara said, holding it out. Wren took it with her good arm. Lily pressed in close beside her. Bev, Dara said. I know, Bev said. I'm not leaving you. Dara looked at her. Bev Haller, 63 years old, who ran a diner on a rural highway and had been an ER nurse before that, and had walked into all of this because a woman she knew and a child she had just met needed someone who wouldn't walk away. There was nothing to argue with in her expression. Then stay by the door, Dara said. Don't open it until I say. She looked back at Wren and Lily. Wren was already at the entrance to the passage, one hand on the low frame the box held against her chest. Lily stood beside her, looking back at Dara. The look the girl gave her was long and clear, and contained everything a 6-year-old knows about the concept of goodbye when she isn't sure it isn't permanent. She had seen enough of goodbye this week to know its weight. Dara met her eyes. Go with your mama, she said. Stay low, stay quiet. You remember the way you remember everything else. Lily held her gaze for one more second. Then she nodded with the small, serious nod that Dara had already come to recognize as the girl's version of a commitment. She turned and went into the passage after her mother. The canvas curtain dropped back into place. Dara turned to the door. Outside, the sounds below had changed, voices now low and directional, coming up the path toward the hillside. Not hurrying, not yet. They didn't know they were running out of time. She checked the knife in her boot, checked the room for anything useful, found a length of heavy chain used to secure the propane tank, found a short wood-cutting hatchet behind the door. Bev watched her. There's something else I want you to understand, Dara said, not looking up from the hatchet. About how they found us. Tell me. Grady was the secondary track. The primary was your phone. Reed had monitoring software installed on it 3 weeks ago, probably when he came to the diner asking after Ren. He already knew the cabin existed from talking to Ren's mother in the hospital. He just needed someone to lead him to the bunker because the cabin alone wasn't enough. So he let Lily lead us here. She set down the hatchet and looked at Bev directly. None of this is your fault. The phone was compromised before any of this started. I'm telling you so you understand the kind of preparation we're dealing with. Bev's face was steady. A man who plans that carefully doesn't leave loose ends, Dara said. Which is why what Ren told us about the FBI contact matters. It changes his calculation. He can't simply make us disappear. There's a clock running that exists completely outside of anything he can control. Bev nodded slowly. So we just have to survive until that clock does its work. That's the whole plan, Dara said. The footsteps on the path outside were close now. 15 feet. 10. Dara positioned herself to the left of the door, back against the stone wall, where she would be behind the door when it opened. Bev stood against the far wall, still and quiet, her hands at her sides. The door opened. Marcus Reed came through it first. He was not what the name had conjured, not physically imposing in the raw way of men who lead with their size. Medium height, lean, with a stillness about him that was more controlled than calm. The stillness of a man who had learned that economy of movement communicated authority more effectively than demonstrations of force. He wore dark clothes, nothing distinctive. His face was regular featured, the kind of face that didn't draw attention in a crowd, which Dara understood immediately was a deliberate cultivation, a face that had been trained to give nothing away. He looked at the empty cot, at the canvas curtain, at the waterproof box that was no longer on the floor. Then he turned and looked directly at Dara. Not surprised, not alarmed, recalibrating. "Dara Cole," he said. The way he said it confirmed what Tuck had told her. He had done his homework. He knew exactly who she was. "I've been hearing your name for the past 6 hours. Two men came in behind him, both larger than Reed, both moving with the particular watchfulness of men hired for situations that required controlled violence. One took up a position near the door. The other moved to block the canvas curtain. Reed looked at where the box had been. "She's gone." "I don't know what you're referring to," Dara said. "You're a difficult woman," Reed said. "No heat in it, just assessment. You've caused me a significant amount of inconvenience in less than 12 hours. Glad to hear it." He looked at her steadily. "I want the child. I want the box. I have no particular interest in you beyond your usefulness in finding those two things. That's a straightforward transaction, and I'm offering you the chance to step away from it with nothing worse than a bad evening." Dara said nothing. Reed waited a reasonable amount of time for an answer. When none came, something behind his eyes settled the way a calculation settles when the last variable is confirmed. "How much time have you bought them?" he asked. Dara looked at him without answering. Reed looked at the canvas curtain, at the man blocking it, at the hatchet in Dara's hand. He was doing the math that she had already done the second passage, the time it took to crawl through 20 feet of rock, the head start. He was calculating whether he had lost or whether he had simply been delayed. "Find the exit," he said to the man by the curtain without raising his voice. The man pushed through the curtain. Reed looked back at Dara. "Whatever she told you about what's in that box to us," he said, "the picture is more complicated than she presented it." "I'm sure it is," Dara said. "That's what people always say." Something moved through his face, not anger, not quite. Something flatter and more absolute than anger. The recognition that the conversation was completed. "You killed 3 women," Dara said. The room was very quiet. Associated with your chapter before you were removed, 3 women who knew too much or saw too much or simply existed in proximity to things you needed kept quiet. She watched his face. Ren Dawson was going to be the 4th. Lily was going to be the 5th. Still nothing. His face gave back nothing. But the man against the wall shifted slightly, a small involuntary movement, and the man who had gone through the curtain could be heard pausing in the passage beyond. The kind of pause that meant he was hearing something he was recalibrating around. Good. Division was useful. Reed studied her with the focused attention of someone who was reassessing a variable. You were Hell's Angels for 12 years. And then I wasn't, she said. Once in you know what that means. I know exactly what it means, Dara said. I also know what being pushed out for killing women means. I know which one of us left with something worth keeping, and which one didn't. Something finally moved behind Reed's eyes. It wasn't rage. It was colder than rage and more precise. He nodded to the remaining man near the door, who moved toward Dara with the careful speed of someone who had been given clear instructions about what to do and how to do it. Dara was ready. The first man came at her from the left. He was fast, bigger than he had looked when he was simply standing still, and he moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. Not a brawler, not a street fighter, but a man trained in the specific and limited vocabulary of controlled restraint. He came in low arms extended to grab rather than strike, trying to take the hatchet out of the equation by getting inside its range before she could swing it. Dara let him get close. Then she stepped inside his reach and drove her elbow up into his jaw with everything she had. The sound was unpleasant. He staggered back and hit the stone wall and went down to one knee, and in the same motion, Dara turned toward Reed, who had not moved, and threw the hatchet at the space between them. Not at him, but at the floor in front of him. The heavy steel head striking the packed earth with enough force and enough accuracy to make him pull back a step and change his angle, which was all she needed. She was already moving toward the fallen man, taking the zip ties from his jacket pocket. She had spotted them when he came in the small rectangular bulge at the hip, and she had his wrist secured behind him before he had fully registered what was happening. Reed watched this with the same composed attention he brought to everything. Bev moved. She had spent the last 90 seconds positioning herself carefully along the wall toward the shelf where the battery-powered lantern sat, and beside it the camp stove, and beside that the small propane canister that fed it. While Reed was watching, Dara Bev picked up the propane canister, turned the valve 1/4 turn until the hiss of gas was clearly audible in the confined space, and looked at Reed with the steady gaze of a woman who had spent 12 years in an emergency room, making rapid decisions about acceptable risk. Reed heard the hiss. He turned. "That's a very small canister," he said. "It is," Bev agreed. "But this room has one entrance and stone walls and the ventilation of a root cellar. You've been breathing the air in here for 4 minutes already." She paused. "I had a patient once, a farmer gas leak in an enclosed barn. He was 50 feet away from the ignition source." She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Reed looked at the canister, looked at the lantern, looked at Bev's face. He was doing the calculation, the same kind of calculation he always did, clear and unemotional, assessing probability and outcome. Bev Haller held his gaze without moving the canister in her hand, the hiss continuing. "Turn it off," Reed said. "When you sit down," Bev said. He sat down. Not because he was afraid Dara could see that he was not afraid in any conventional sense. He sat down because he had decided in that moment that the short-term cost of compliance was lower than the short-term cost of escalation, and because he was still operating on a timeline where he expected to have the advantage again within minutes. The third man, the one who had gone through the passage, would be back. And there were 2 more men outside on the hillside. Bev turned the valve closed. The hiss stopped. She set the canister down with the matter-of-fact calm of someone returning a tool to its proper place. The man on the floor was secured. Reed was seated. The canvas curtain was the remaining variable. Dara moved to stand between Reed and the curtain hatchet back in her left hand. She looked at Reed. Here was the problem she had been working since the door opened. Not the physical problem. The physical problem for the next few minutes was manageable. The real problem was structural. Reed had men outside and another coming back through the passage. Wren and Lily were somewhere on the East Ridge moving through dark terrain with a wounded arm and a 6-year-old and a waterproof box. They had a head start measured in minutes. She needed more time, and she needed what she had already set in motion. Reed looked up at her from where he sat. "You know this doesn't end here," he said. "Tell me about Grady Moss," Dara said. Something shifted in Reed's expression. Fractional. "What about him?" "He sold us your direction. Both ways, actually. His phone call confirming my identity and your tracking software on Bev's phone doing the technical work independently." She kept her voice conversational. "That's redundant preparation. That's a man who doesn't trust single points of failure." She paused. "What did you promise him when this was done?" Reed considered whether to answer. Then, "Nothing he'll collect." The flatness with which he said it was more informative than a detailed explanation would have been. Dara filed it. Grady Moss was a loose end Reed had already categorized. The fact that Reed said this openly in front of witnesses told her something additional about how he envisioned the end of tonight. "You have a problem," Dara said. "Not the problem in this room, a bigger one." Reed looked at her with the patience of someone willing to hear the next move before deciding how to respond to it. "Wren sent a copy of everything in that box to an FBI field contact in Portland 4 days ago. Agent Sandra Kerr organized crime division. Dead man switch. If Wren doesn't call to confirm she's safe and mobile before 6 a.m., Kerr files an active investigation report and opens the package." Dara let that settle for a moment. "It's just past 1 in the morning. You have less than 5 hours." Reed was very still. "The package includes the secondary account records," Dara continued. "The ones that show the diversion from Vasquez operations, the skimming, the parallel network you've been building without their knowledge." She watched his face. "I imagine that's a phone call you'd rather make yourself before Agent Kerr makes it for you." The silence that followed this lasted 7 full seconds. Reed stood up. He did not look at his secured man on the floor. He did not look at Bev. He looked at Dara, and in his look was the acknowledgement of a completed equation. All variables resolved outcome determined the only remaining question being the manner of conclusion, rather than the conclusion itself. "You can't protect her indefinitely," he said, not to Dara, to the room, to Wren, wherever she was beyond the hillside. "She already protected herself," Dara said. 4 days ago. Everything that happens now is just a follow-through." Something moved through his face, not quite respect, not quite its opposite. The recognition of a situation that had been constructed around him with more precision than he had accounted for. He had underestimated a woman who had been planning her escape while he was planning her end. He made the calculation one final time. Outside, distantly through the stone and hillside, Dara heard something she had been listening for without admitting she was listening for it. A sound she had first heard 20 years ago and recognized in her bones before her mind caught up. The sound of multiple Harley engines, not on a highway, but close coming up a rough road in the dark. The kind of riding that required both skill and purpose. 4 engines, maybe 5. Reed heard it too. His head turned toward the door, and in the movement was the first real crack in the composure, not fear, but the rapid reassessment of a man who had just discovered that his resource calculation was wrong, that the variables he had been working with did not include this variable. The door of the bunker opened. Boone came through it first. He was 55 years old and built like a man who had spent 30 years doing physical work and had no intention of stopping. Gray in his dark beard, a face that had been weathered by decades of wind and weather and decisions made at speed on dark roads. His jacket bore patches Dara had not seen in 5 years, and the sight of them produced something complicated in her chest that she did not have time to examine. Behind him came four others men she recognized from another chapter of her life, faces she associated with a specific and complicated past that she had ridden away from and never quite left behind. Boone looked at Reed, at the secured man on the floor, at Bev against the wall, at Dara. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You look terrible, Cole." "You're late," she said. 8-hour window, you said. He checked the watch on his thick wrist. "You've got 2 hours left." Things moved faster than expected. Boone looked at Reed. The look was long and specific. The look of a man regarding something he had unfinished business with. "Marcus Reed," he said, not a greeting. A statement of confirmed identification. Reed looked at him with the same composure he had brought to everything else. But the composure now had the quality of a surface rather than a depth. Something had changed in the room's geometry numbers, positions the physical reality of 5 additional people between Reed and every exit. And Reed's calculations were producing outcomes that did not include a favorable resolution. "Boone," he said, "the last time I saw you." Boone said, "I told you that if I saw you again, the conversation would be different." He paused. "I'm a man of my word." Two of Boone's people moved to the secured man on the floor and checked the zip ties. A third man positioned himself at the door. A fourth moved to the canvas curtain and checked the passage beyond it, and returned 2 minutes later with a brief report that Boone absorbed without visible reaction. The third man who had gone through the passage earlier, the one Reed had called Harlan, had been located at the far end and was no longer a problem. Reed stood in the center of all of this and made his final calculation. Then he sat back down. It was not defeat in the conventional sense. It was the logical conclusion of a cost-benefit analysis that had finally run out of favorable options. He sat down with the same controlled composure with which he had done everything else, and he looked at the floor, and he was still. Outside, at some point during the securing of the room, the canvas curtain moved. Not from the passage side. From the main room, quietly, the way someone moves when they are checking whether it is safe to move at all. Lily came through it. Dara was across the room in 3 steps, intercepting her, going to one knee, her hands on the girl's shoulders. "What are you doing? Where is your mother?" Lily was breathing hard from the crawl back through the passage. Her dress was dirty from the rock floor. Her focus was immediate and clear. "Mama's at the back of the cabin," she said. "There's a window that doesn't lock right. She's waiting. She sent me through with this." She reached into the front of her dress and produced the waterproof box, held it out with both hands. From somewhere above them and behind the hillside, coming through the ventilation gap near the ceiling, a narrow horizontal opening that Dara had noted earlier as a structural necessity in any underground room that needed airflow, came Wren's voice. Calm, distinct, carrying the particular clarity of someone who has decided exactly what they are going to say and is saying it without revision. Marcus, just the name, level, without drama. Reed looked up at the ceiling, at the gap. "The box is in this room now," Wren's voice said. "And the box isn't the problem anymore. It hasn't been the problem since 4 days ago when I sent everything to Portland." A pause. "You already know about Agent Kerr. Dara told you. What she may not have mentioned is that the copy I sent is complete, including the subsidiary ledgers, the secondary accounts, the operational logs you don't know I found." Another pause. "That's the material that connects you to the Vasquez diversion, not as a contractor, as the architect." Her voice was steady and unhurried. 5 hours. A little less now. That's how long you have before Sandra Kerr makes decisions you can't influence. Reed looked at the ceiling for a long time. Dara watched his face. The calculation running behind his eyes was visible as pure process emotion stripped away the mechanism working through its variables one final time. He was checking the claim against what he knew. Was Ren Dawson the kind of person who would have planned this far ahead? Who would have made contact with a federal agent before the situation fully collapsed? Who would have thought to set up a dead man switch weeks or months before she needed it? He had underestimated her once. He could see in this moment exactly how comprehensively he had underestimated her. There's something else. Ren's voice came through the gap. The subsidiary ledger includes 3 years of records, not just the diversion, the original operations, the ones that predate your arrangement with Vasquez. A pause that was perfectly calibrated. I think you understand what that means for the people who will receive that information. The longest silence in the room followed this. Reed looked at the floor, at his hands, at the stone walls of a bunker in a hillside on the Oregon coast, surrounded by people he had not accounted for, with a clock running somewhere in Portland that he could not stop. He did not speak again. Boone looked at Dara across the room. In his look was the question and its answer simultaneously. Was it done? And yes, it was done. He moved to Reed and produced zip ties with the efficiency of a man who had come prepared, and Reed's wrist was secured behind him with the same clean professionalism with which he had done everything else in his life, only this time on the receiving end of it. Dara exhaled. Lily was still beside her. Dara felt the small hand find her forearm, not her burned one, her right one, and hold on to it briefly, not dramatically. Just the contact of a child confirming that the safest thing in the room was still present and still there. Dara put her hand over Lily's for a moment. Then she stood and moved to the door. "Stay with Bev," she said. "I'm going to get your mother." She went out into the Oregon night. The air was cold and clean and smelled of the ocean and the dark forest and the absence of smoke, which felt like a kind of permission after the day they had all had. She walked around the back of the cabin, following the hillside, until she found the small window Lily had described low on the rear wall, its latch hanging open, at an angle that spoke of habitual looseness rather than recent force. Wren was crouched below it in the darkness, the waterproof box nowhere in sight. She had given it to Lily to carry back through the passage, her good arm braced against the stone foundation. Her face pale and drawn, but her eyes fully alert. "It's over," Dara said. Wren looked at her for a moment. Then she let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding for a very long time. Not just tonight, for months. The breath of someone who has been braced against an impact for so long that the cessation of bracing feels almost like a different kind of shock. "Lily," she said. "She's inside. She's fine. She came back through the passage herself." Dara paused. "Your daughter is something else." Wren's eyes filled. She looked at the window. She looked at the hillside. She looked at Dara with an expression that contained everything she had no adequate words for. "Let me help you up," Dara said, and offered her hand. They went back inside together. The federal vehicles arrived 22 minutes after Dara sent the coordinates from Boone's satellite phone. 3 black SUVs and a county sheriff's unit moving in a coordinated column through the dark tree canopy. Their light bars off the way federal operations move when they are confident of their location and do not need to advertise arrival. Agent Sandra Kerr was in the second vehicle, a compact woman in her 40s with close-cut hair and the particular bearing of someone who had spent 20 years in rooms where she was underestimated and had developed a useful immunity to it. She had been awake and operational since Wren's dead drop notification had pinged her system 4 days ago, running quiet preparation while the clock ran ready to move the moment the call came in. She came through the bunker door and took in the scene with the practiced sweep of someone cataloging information in real time. Reed and his men secured. Boone's people present and quiet and clearly expecting a conversation about their own status. Bev Haller sitting on the cot with Lily asleep against her shoulder. The child's body finally surrendered completely to exhaustion in the way that only happens when the last layer of maintained tension has been released. Wren on the camp stool with her injured arm resting on her knee upright and coherent, and looking at Kerr with the direct gaze of a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment for 6 months. Kerr looked at the waterproof box on the floor beside Wren. She took it, spent 10 minutes with it, working through the material with gloved hands. Her face doing the careful work of a professional assessing the quality of evidence without allowing her reaction to be visible. Then she looked up at Wren and said 4 words. "This is very good." Wren's shoulders dropped, just slightly, just enough to see. Reed was brought out of the bunker in handcuffs, 2 federal agents at his sides. He walked through the clearing with the same composed bearing he had brought to every other moment of the night. No performance, no reaction. The total privacy of a man who had closed himself off from the meaning of what was happening to him. He did not look at Dara as he passed her. She watched him go. The feeling in her chest was not satisfaction and not triumph. It was closer to the feeling of a load being set down after a long carry, the absence of something that had been present which was its own kind of sensation. Kerr's people processed Reed's men separately. One of them, the cooperative one, had been speaking at length to a federal agent for the past 15 minutes, with the focused speed of a man who had decided that information was the best available currency. Whether that transaction would serve him in the long run was not Dara's concern. Boone's people were interviewed by a county deputy in the clearing answers, carefully minimal presence explained, as friends responding to a distress call from an acquaintance. The deputy seemed skeptical, but focused. There were larger concerns in the immediate environment, and the presence of 5 bikers who had apparently helped secure a dangerous criminal rather than complicate the situation was not the problem anyone was most interested in solving that night. Dara sat on the porch steps of the cabin and let Doc, a former Army medic who had been riding with Boone's chapter for 15 years, look at her face and forearm in the beam of a flashlight. The cut above her right eye, reopened in the fight, was deep enough to need closing properly, and Doc did it with butterfly strips and the matter-of-fact efficiency of long practice. The ribs were bruised, possibly cracked on the left side. The burn on her forearm was real and would require proper medical treatment, but was not immediately dangerous. "You need a hospital," Doc said. "Later," she said. He gave her the look of a man who had been told this many times by many people who were incorrect about whether it was actually later. He cleaned everything he could clean and dressed everything he could dress and left her with a list of reasons to go sooner rather than later. Boone came and sat beside her on the steps after a while. They did not speak for some time. The clearing around them was active federal vehicles, people moving with purpose. The organized machinery of law enforcement doing what it does after the immediate crisis has resolved. The lighthouse stood on its headland in the darkness, dark and patient, its purpose long since passed to other means. Tuck said, "You've been riding alone for 5 years. Boone said, eventually, "About that. That's a long time to be working something out. Some things take as long as they take." He was quiet for a moment. In his face was the specific knowledge of a man who had watched someone he respected spend years in a kind of deliberate exile, punishing themselves for things that were complicated and not entirely their fault, and who had enough history with that person to say something honest without it becoming an argument. 5 years is a long time, Dara. I know. He did not push further. That was the thing about Boone. He said the thing once clearly and let it sit. He didn't repeat himself and he didn't soften it after the fact. "The man Grady sold us, Dara said after a while. "You know where he is?" "Got a call from Tuck an hour ago. Grady's in Sutherland, sitting at his kitchen table last anyone checked." Boone paused. "He's not going anywhere. He knows how this ends." Make sure Kerr has his name and address before she wraps up here. Already done. Dara looked at the clearing, at the federal vehicles, at the bunker door through which Wren and Lily and Bev were still visible, the three of them together. In the lantern light, Lily awake again now, and sitting up and looking at something Wren was showing her on a piece of paper. She watched them for a moment without speaking. "There's a little girl in there," she said. 6 years old. She spent this afternoon tied to a tree inside a burning forest. This evening, she crawled back through a 20-foot rock passage to bring a box of evidence into a room where the man who tried to kill her was sitting 5 feet away. A pause. She did it because she decided to. Nobody asked her to. Boone looked at the bunker doorway. "I saw her when we came in," he said. "Small kid in a yellow dress." "Yes. She looked right at me and didn't flinch." "She doesn't flinch at much." Boone was quiet for a moment. "What happens to her now?" Dara looked at the doorway, at Wren, who was talking to Kerr now, the waterproof box beside her answering questions with the methodical clarity of someone who has been preparing for exactly this conversation for 6 months. At Lily, who had migrated to Bev's side and was now leaning against the older woman's arm, listening to everything with the attentive patience of a child who understands that the adult's conversation is about her future and takes that seriously. "I don't know yet," Dara said honestly. "The immediate future is federal protection while Reed's case is being built. Wren is going to be a central witness. That has a shape and a timeline to it." She paused. "The after of that, I don't know." "And you?" Boone asked. She didn't answer right away. She thought about a Tuesday afternoon in July, riding an empty highway, going nowhere in particular, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made an art form of not arriving anywhere. She thought about a smell she had noticed, and a sound she had almost missed, and a decision made in the space of a few seconds that had led to here. She thought about a 6-year-old girl in a yellow dress tied to a tree in a burning forest, who had found the nerve to keep calling for help, even when she had no reason to believe anyone would come. And she thought about what it had felt like to come. Not the physical act of it, not the fire or the rope or the sprint through the smoke. The thing underneath that, the purpose of it. The experience of being for the first time in years exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly the thing she was supposed to be doing, with no ambiguity and no question, and no looking back over her shoulder at the weight of what she had left behind. She had not felt that in a very long time. "I don't know yet," she said. And that was the most honest answer she had. Boone nodded. He understood what "I don't know yet" meant when Dara Cole said it. It meant something was shifting even if the final position hadn't been reached. It meant she was not running. It meant the question was open, which was a different thing than it being closed in the wrong direction. He stood up. "My people need to move before things get more official than they already are." He looked at her. "You need anything before we go?" "I'm covered." He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, just for a moment, the contact of a person confirming the presence of someone they are glad is still alive. And then he walked back into the clearing, and his people assembled around him with the quiet coordination of a group that had done this many times before. And the Harleys started one by one, and they rode back down the dark road and were gone. The clearing was quieter without them. Agent Kerr came out of the bunker and walked to where Dara was sitting. She looked at the dressings on Dara's arm and face without comment. "We'll need a full statement," she said. "Tonight if you're up to it, or tomorrow morning. Your call." "Tonight," Dara said. "Let's get it done." Kerr nodded. She had the bearing of a woman who appreciated directness. "I've been briefed on the general shape of events. Lily's mother has been very clear and very thorough." She paused. "What you did driving into that forest, going back through the fire, that's not nothing." "It was the available option," Dara said. Kerr looked at her for a moment with the measuring gaze of someone deciding how much to say. I've been building a case file adjacent to Marcus Reed for 2 years, she said finally. Never had enough to move. Ren Dawson gave me enough to move 10 times over. She paused. The fact that she's alive to give it to me is because of a stranger on a motorcycle who heard a child crying in a burning forest. A beat. I wanted to say that out loud to someone before the paperwork starts. She went back inside. Dara sat on the porch steps and looked at the dark clearing and the stars above the Pacific and let the night settle around her. The ocean was a constant presence in the background. The sound of it, the smell of it, the cold of the water that pressed against the exposed skin of her face and hands. Grady Moss was picked up in Sutherland at 7:15 the following morning by 2 county deputies and a federal liaison officer. He was sitting at his kitchen table, as Boone had said, with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had spent the night deciding not to run and had concluded correctly that not running was the better calculation. He did not resist. He provided information about Reed's Oregon operations with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had already done the math on what cooperation was worth versus what silence would cost. And the information he provided was, as Agent Kerr would later note in her formal debrief, substantially useful toward the broader investigation. The formal statement process took 4 hours spread across the early morning and into mid-morning, conducted at a county sheriff's substation in a room that smelled of old coffee and institutional carpet. Wren gave the most detailed account, having the most detailed knowledge. Dara gave a statement that was precise and complete and did not editorialize. Bev Haller gave a statement that was calm and factual and impressed the deputy, taking it with its clarity, which did not surprise Dara at all. Lily was interviewed separately by a child specialist brought in from the county seat in a room with soft furniture and a box of crayons. And the interview took 40 minutes and covered what she had seen and experienced with the careful professionalism of someone who understood both the necessity and the cost of asking a 6-year-old to revisit the worst day of her life. By 11 in the morning, the statements were complete, the immediate legal machinery was in motion, and Marcus Reed was in federal custody with no bail consideration on the table. His network would take months to fully unwind. The Vasquez connection would take longer. The 3 women who had disappeared years ago remained gone, their cases now reopened with new investigative resources and the kind of documentary evidence that changes what is possible. Whether that would be enough for justice in those cases was something no one could promise. But the machinery was moving in the right direction. That was not nothing. At noon, Bev Haller drove them back to the diner in a vehicle borrowed from the sheriff's department. Her own truck was still in the clearing by the lighthouse, evidence of the previous night's events. But it would be returned to her eventually, and she was philosophical about this in the way that people who have been through genuinely difficult things become philosophical about inconveniences. The diner was as she had left it. Closed sign in the window lights off the interior, quiet and smelling of the previous evening's coffee and the particular stillness of a space that's been empty overnight. Bev turned the lights on and put a pot of fresh coffee on and moved through her kitchen with the purposeful ease of a person returning to work they know and trust. And within an hour the grill was warm and the diner smelled like what it was supposed to smell like. And the morning felt almost like something that was going to be survived. Ren's arm was treated properly that afternoon at the county hospital. The infection addressed with IV antibiotics and the wound cleaned and dressed by someone with the appropriate equipment. The doctor kept her overnight for observation. Lily stayed with Bev at the diner, sleeping in the back office on the cot that had seen a number of emergency situations over the years, under a quilt that Bev kept there for exactly this kind of need. Dara's own trip to the hospital was that same afternoon. The burn was cleaned and dressed with proper materials, the ribs taped, the cut above her eye properly closed. She was given a prescription she intended to fill and a list of follow-up instructions she intended to follow. Because for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she had a reason to take care of the immediate future. She drove back to the diner in a county vehicle with a medical bracelet on her left wrist and the strange sensation of having somewhere to go. The days that followed had the quality of aftermath, the particular texture of time after a crisis, when the acute pressure has released, but the landscape it has shaped is still being mapped. Federal investigators came and went, following up on statements, asking clarifying questions, building the architecture of a case that would take months to fully construct. Wren was in regular contact with Agent Kerr, the relationship between them, having shifted from asset and handler to something more collaborative and direct, in the way that shared experience tends to shift formal relationships. Wren and Lily stayed at the diner for a week in the small apartment above it that Bev kept for the occasional relative or friend in transit. Then they moved to a motel 20 miles north that was clean and quiet, and whose proprietor asked no questions under an arrangement that would hold until the federal protection program could be formally established, which would take several weeks of paperwork and processing. Dara stayed at the diner. She told herself this was temporary. She told herself she was staying to make sure things were stable, that it was practical to remain in the area while the investigation was active, and statements might need to be revisited. These were not false reasons. They were also not the complete reason. The complete reason was harder to articulate, and she did not try very hard. 6 weeks after the night at the lighthouse on a Tuesday morning in early September, the Douglas firs along the Oregon coast had begun their slow seasonal shift, the undergrowth turning from summer green to the golden rust of the first cool weather. The air was different, cleaner, sharper, carrying the particular quality of Pacific Coast autumn that felt like a page turning. Haller's Diner sat on the east side of the coastal highway, where it had always sat, its hand-painted sign slightly straighter than it had been 6 weeks ago. A new coat of paint on the porch railing that Bev had applied herself on a dry weekend in August. The neon open sign in the window worked as it always had. Inside, the morning was quiet. The breakfast rush had not yet begun. The coffee was fresh and the grill was warming, and the light through the east windows was the particular golden quality of early autumn morning, low and long and generous with itself. Dara Cole sat at the counter with a mug of black coffee and her hands flat on the worn formica surface, looking at nothing in particular. Her forearm had healed. The burn was there, a changed texture of skin, a permanent record of a specific Tuesday in July, but it was healed. The cut above her eye had closed clean. The ribs had taken 4 weeks. She moved without favoring anything now, which she considered a reasonable outcome given what the month had asked of her body. In the corner booth, Lily was drawing. She had a proper set of colored pencils now, not crayons pencils. The kind that allowed for the detail and precision her drawings were increasingly demanding. She bent over the paper with the focused quiet of a child engaged in serious work, her tongue occasionally appearing at the corner of her mouth when she was getting something particularly right. The yellow dress had been replaced with a blue sweater and jeans, because September on the Oregon coast required layers, and Lily had learned this efficiently. The pink sneakers were the same ones cleaned. Her mother was in the kitchen. Wren Dawson had started helping Bev 3 weeks ago, first, as something to do while her arm finished healing, then as something she found she wanted to continue doing. She moved in the kitchen with a quality that was different from how she must have moved 6 months ago before any of this. Quieter than before, but more present, the way people move when they have stopped bracing for impact and are beginning carefully and without making a ceremony of it to simply inhabit a space. The federal protection arrangement was still being processed. There would be a period of relocation, a new start somewhere else, the practical architecture of a life rebuilt under different names in a different place. That was coming. But it had not come yet, and in the meantime there was breakfast and the smell of coffee and the early September light, and the sound of Lily's pencils moving across paper in the corner booth. Wren came through the swinging door now with a plate and set it on the counter beside Dara's coffee. Scrambled eggs toast, the kind of breakfast that required someone to think about what you needed rather than ask what you wanted. Dara looked at it, looked at Wren. "You didn't eat," Wren said simply, and went back to the kitchen. Dara looked at the plate for a moment. Then she picked up the fork. Bev came out of the kitchen with the coffee pot and refilled Dara's mug without being asked. She had done this every morning for 6 weeks. It had become a kind of ritual unremarked upon by either of them, which was the best kind of ritual. She looked at Lily in the corner booth, then at Dara. She was up at 5:30, Bev said, drawing before the light was good enough to see by. I had to turn on the lamp for her. What's she working on? Bev smiled. You'll see. From the corner booth, Lily's voice, Dara, come look. Dara brought her coffee and went to the booth and slid in across from the girl. On the paper before her was a drawing careful and detailed, in the way Lily's drawings had become over the past weeks. Not the simple shapes of a frightened child marking what she knew, but something more considered, more precise, more deliberate about the specific things it chose to include and exclude. A figure on a motorcycle. The bike rendered with surprising accuracy the low profile of a sportster, the saddlebags the particular angle of the handlebars, the rider's silver-streaked hair visible beneath the helmet. The open road stretching ahead in both directions to the edges of the paper, with the suggestion of trees on either side and stars visible above the way. Stars look in places where the light pollution hasn't reached yet. Below the figure, in careful block letters that were a 6-year-old's best approximation of a word, she had chosen with intention the word she had been working on getting right since before the light was good enough to see by Angel. Dara looked at the drawing for a long moment, at the figure on the open road with the silver hair and the long highway ahead. That's not what I am, she said. Lily looked up at her with the direct, unhurried gaze of a child who has thought carefully about the thing she is about to say and is not going to be argued out of it. It's what you were that night, she said. I get to decide. Dara looked at the drawing again, at the road that went in both directions, at the stars above, at the figure that was not running from anything but simply riding, which she was beginning to understand was different in ways she did not yet have complete language for, but was learning. She thought about what Boone had said on the porch steps. 5 years is a longer time to be working something out. She thought about 20 years of roads she had never planned to take twice, and what that accumulation added up to, and whether it added up to anything that could be pointed in a useful direction instead of simply away. She thought about a ranger hitch, about a smell in the air and a sound almost missed, about the 3 seconds she had taken at the tree line before walking into the smoke, not because she was afraid, but because she had been in tight situations before, and knew that 3 seconds of reading the environment before you committed to a direction was the difference between effective action and chaos. She thought about what it had felt like to come out of the fire with a child in her arms. Not the heroism of it, she had no patience for that framing. The simple physical reality of it, the weight of the girl, the way her small body had trusted completely in the middle of the worst moment of her life in the arms that were carrying her. And she thought about a drawing on a paper napkin in a diner booth, a child's hand making a careful outline of a house, a tree, a swing. She thought about all the things a person could be given enough road and enough time and the right moment to stop going in a straight line. Lily, she said. Yes. That drawing. She paused. Can I keep it? Lily looked at her. Something moved through her face, the full weight of the gesture being recognized, which in a 6-year-old looks like a kind of quiet light. She carefully tore the drawing along the margin of the paper, trimming away the rough edge, and held it out. Dara took it. She looked at it for a moment longer, then folded it once along the horizontal with care, and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket against her chest, where the other phone was. Outside, her Harley sat in the gravel lot in the early September sun. She could see it through the diner window. Black, worn, patient, waiting the way it always waited without judgment about whether she would stay or go. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked back at the booth, at the empty paper where the drawing had been, at Lily already reaching for a fresh sheet and a different pencil beginning the next thing. The focused absorption of a child for whom the present moment is sufficient, and the future will take care of itself when it arrives. Wren came out of the kitchen and sat down in the booth across from Lily, setting down 2 cups of cocoa, one for Lily, one for herself. And for a moment she and Lily were simply a mother and a daughter, sitting at a diner table on a September morning, looking at the same piece of paper, the same colored pencils, the same clear light coming through the window. Bev was at the counter. Her movements were unhurried, a small smile at the corner of her mouth that she didn't bother to conceal, the smile of a person who has seen enough of the world's difficult hours to recognize what a good one looks like when it comes along. Dara sat at the counter with her coffee and her eggs and the folded drawing in her jacket pocket and looked at the 4 of them. Wren, Lily, Bev, the morning light on the checkered floor. The smell of coffee and toast and the salt air coming through the slightly open door, and felt something she had not felt in so long that she had almost forgotten what it was. Not happiness exactly, not yet. Happiness was a destination, and she had always been suspicious of destinations. But its precondition, the knowledge that the ground was solid under her feet, that the thing she had been afraid of had been faced and had not destroyed her, and had in fact delivered her through a fire and a dark road and a hillside bunker to this particular counter stool on this particular Tuesday morning, which was enough. The coastal highway outside the window was waking up. A logging truck moved north, a family sedan south. An old pickup with a dog in the back slowed and turned into the lot and parked. And a man in his 70s with a sun-weathered face came in through the door and nodded to Bev and took a stool at the far end of the counter and said the same thing he said every Tuesday morning. The usual Bev. Coming right up, Earl. The ordinary traffic of an ordinary Tuesday. This was what ordinary looked like. She had been away from it for a long time. Dara wrapped both hands around the warm mug. She did not think about the road, not yet.